Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
This week we're watching Collision. It's an Ana Lucia episode, sort of the second Ana Lucia episode in a row, kind of, after the other 48 days.
Yeah, as discussed last week, but this week we've got an interview with Leonard Dick, a writer who's been on our fine podcast a number of times now, and a wonderful guy, but the writer behind this episode.
Let's get into it. As always on The Hatch, we start with our hot takes. Rosie, what is your hot take about Collision?
One particular scene that I just thought was brilliant was the scene where Jack hits his golf ball into the stream.
I love that.
And then naturally insists on going looking for it instead of just taking a drop, which is very Jack. Taking a drop, for folks who might not have a lot of familiarity with golf, means that you just get to step out of the hazardous area and just drop a ball, and it counts as an extra stroke, so it impacts your score, and it's a bit of a pride thing. It's a little embarrassing to have to take a drop, but naturally Jack refuses. But then you just get to watch Kate's face, sort of the blood drains out of her face and she starts to look really scared, and you're like, what is she seeing? Oh my god. And then the camera pans up and it's just Echo standing with Sawyer, and he says, where is the doctor?
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, it's brilliant. It's so well done. And I just took so much joy in watching that scene.
I actually have a hot take that also has to do with the golf sequence, which is I just love how Kate has absolutely no patience for Jack mansplaining golf to her.
No.
Just
no.
Shuts him down immediately and then makes a fool out of him playing golf. Go Kate.
Yeah.
Can I do another hot take also?
You may.
Okay. So my other hot take is about Libby, and it's the moment where she has decided to leave Ana Lucia and continue on to the beach. And her explanation to Ana Lucia of why she's leaving is, you're a poor judge of character. I was there when you put Nathan in the pit. It's just how rude. Libby also wanted to put Nathan in the pit.
Yeah, you're right. She was whispering in Ana Lucia's ear,
yeah.
He makes me nervous. He never talks about himself.
And she was there when Anna was digging the pit, and Anna was like, why do you think I'm digging this pit? Libby was on board. Jesus. There were lots of good reasons to leave Ana Lucia this episode. You had to pick that one, Libby? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess
that's a strong point. I'm with you on that.
So do you want to talk about Anna? Do you want to talk about something else?
There's a lot of people I want to talk about in this episode because it's this wonderful chorus of all of our characters coming back together. And so there's so many fascinating interactions. So when John Locke and Mr. Echo meet in the hatch, they have this marvelous exchange where Echo is just looking around the hatch what the hell is this place? Which is a perfectly reasonable reaction. And John comes out and he just says
hello. Hello.
Casual as can be. It's just this wonderful meeting of the minds that portends so many things to come.
I enjoyed how unfazed they seemed by each other.
Yeah.
Which you would think they would freak out and panic, at least Locke would, and there's, this is interesting.
Yeah, Locke has mellowed out a lot while we've been gone. Seemingly.
He's just so happy to be pushing the button every 108 minutes.
Maybe. Sawyer was brought into the hatch, clearly about to die, and John just kind of comes over and says, what's going on? And Jack says, the button. And John says, oh, yes, of course. And then, my man is really, he was up at a 10, and he's really brought it down to, a 2.
He needs to save it up for the sustained 10 that he's on for, the last 3 seasons of the show. Man.
Yeah. So there's that. There's obviously the Sayid Ana Lucia dynamic is fascinating to watch.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about this is that we really see Sayid at the end of his rope, and he's still so principled, and I think so fundamentally good.
Where do you see the principled and fundamentally good at the end there?
When he's tied to the tree, there are moments when he interjects in the conversation that everybody else is having, when he says, she has no plan. She's only keeping you here because she feels guilty. It's something about her guilt
Right.
And it's like this... When I heard that, I was like, oh, that's a very concise and accurate read. That he just delivered, even though he's clearly obviously very upset with very good reason. But he was sort of able to, like, speak that with clarity, and, like, at the end of the episode when Anna offers him the chance to kill her, I mean, she wants to die.
Pick it up. I deserve it.
What good would it be to kill you? If we're both already dead.
And I was just like, ooh.
I thought that was very dark.
It was, but
yeah.
He's not out for revenge.
That's
He's
true.
not, he doesn't really fight when he gets tied up. He warns her that, like, he tortured a man out in these woods about 40 days ago, and, it haunts him, and he doesn't think she should do this, but, he's... I don't know. I just felt like it would have been totally reasonable for Sayid to act just a little bit irrational here, and he still does not.
That's really... I definitely had not thought about it that way, because I was so focused on this being like... Sayid is at the end of his rope, he's just totally lost all, hope and vigor for everything, and he's just given up. But that's sort of how I read it, but I think your reading might make more sense. I mean, the line about we're both already dead, I mean, that to me also speaks to sort of a despair.
Oh, definitely.
That what is... And I wondered if it was more about, not wanting to take sort of violent revenge versus feeling like there's no point.
But the fact that he feels like there's no point means... It doesn't necessarily mean there's no point in anything. Because he clearly takes an interest in Michael. He asks, where's Walt?
That's true. That's true.
Michael says, like, well, he got taken from the raft. And Sayid's like, what? Because he's just seen Walt. It's not that he believes that, like, well, fuck it, everything's over. I'm not going to try anything for anybody.
But everything's over for him specifically, so what would the point of revenge be?
Right. What would the point be, I guess, of bringing more guilt upon himself, or... Yeah, like, he's... There's a lot of interpersonal revenge plot lines on this show, and a lot of them are kind of justified, because a lot of people have
do
been
stuff that deserve having revenge taken upon them.
Yeah, like, it's justified in some ways, and this would be one of them, but Sayid chooses not to go that route, I think out of a combination of, like, he just doesn't want to exert, like, the emotional energy, because it won't bring Shannon back, and he knows it won't bring him any peace. I think that's probably what's at the core of it. Like, he knows killing Anna won't make him feel any better. It won't get rid of the despair.
Almost 40 days ago on this very island, I tied a man to a tree and I tortured him. I tortured him as I've tortured many men. Men whose voices I still hear in the night. Should you kill me? Maybe you should. Maybe you were meant to.
Maybe he's also kind of feeling like, well, I guess I deserve all of this, so I, might as well take some more.
I think that's very, very possible. It makes sense.
We should talk about Anna.
Yeah,
well.
That ended up being an ode to Sayid, as most of these conversations do. Yeah, so what were your thoughts on Ana Lucia? I know we spent a long time last episode talking about Ana Lucia, but any new revelations here?
I mean, I guess the main thing that I was thinking about was the thing about her insisting that she's better off alone. And I guess my thing with this episode was thinking that there were a bunch of points throughout it where we see evidence that really she actually does not want to be alone and, like, desperately craves being with people, even though she'll never admit that. Like, just the way that she tries so badly to keep the whole group together. Like, she has no reason... I mean, they want to... everyone wants to go. Like, they're sick of her. they don't like what she's doing. Like, they're near the beach anyway. They don't really need her to keep them alive anymore.
Right.
But she's still, like, with no plan whatsoever and no idea what she's doing, like, literally holds them all there at gunpoint the whole episode so that nobody can go anywhere. Which maybe you could read a different way as, like, she wants people to depend on her, to need her. But there was this moment with Mr. Echo where when he's going to go, she goes straight at it and she says, "Don't leave, please." And there's this, like, vulnerability there that I just felt like, okay, when she says, "I'm better off alone," probably what this really means is, like, I feel like I'm always alone because people don't like me, but I really wish people liked me and wanted to be around me.
Yeah, and to kind of take that a step further, I think it comes from a place of, like, well, I just fuck everything up for everybody. So it would be better for everyone else if I were to go it alone. Like, then I wouldn't be keeping Bernard from his wife, and I wouldn't have killed this woman, and, and I wouldn't have, fucked things up for my mother in the police force and my partner, and I think that might be part of it as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Which is a shame because, as we sort of talked about last week, like, she has a lot of good leadership qualities when she's not, like, pissing people off by virtue of her personality.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I still think that's true.
You think what's true?
That she has a lot of potential as a leader.
Yeah, it's surprised that the others didn't put her down on their good person list.
Well, so something that's interesting here, we can see if this goes anywhere, is that, so in the flashback, she has the opportunity to identify her shooter and have the justice system handle him. And she decides, no, like, I want to exact my personal revenge instead. And I wonder if that kind of speaks to this thing that we're talking about. Like, she feels like that is her responsibility. Like, this man took something from me, my future child, and I want to be the one to take something from him. In this case, his life. Like, it's that same, like, how last week we talked about how she assumes all the responsibility for Goodwin.
Right.
Even at personal risk, because either she feels like she needs to, or just she feels like she's the most capable, or
she feels like she made a mistake the first time and it's now on her to fix the mistake.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the same instinct we're seeing here. Like, she's a cop, she's part of this big justice system, but she feels like this is my fight.
Yeah, I wonder what is the psychological thing that stems from. Does she not trust anyone else to do it right? Does she just feel like...
No, I think that's a big part of it. Like, I think we see consistent evidence for that, where she's very much a, like, if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself.
Right.
Kind of person. I guess even in the case of vengeance.
Yeah. Hindsights.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. And this is something that sort of comes up in the Leonard Dick interview, but I'm curious about it now. The Jack, Kate, Sawyer love triangle, which we sort of get hints of here. I am very curious, in retrospect, how you feel about that.
I mean, my feelings about Jack are well known to
the listeners of the Hatch podcast.
Listeners.
Yes, as are mine.
I think, like, the budding romance between Jack and Kate is, like, just awkward and hard to watch, and, like, there doesn't seem to be any chemistry between them at all. Like, even in this episode, there's so much, like, forced flirting in the golf exchange that's just like, really, you guys? Really?
Yeah.
But then, I mean, when we see Kate go to, like, as soon as she sees that Sawyer's injured, she thinks, like, oh, I need to go care for him. Like, that's where I need to be. Which is also what she does when she finds out Jack is injured. So, I don't know that we can glean anything from that. But, like, Jack says this very annoying thing when, like, Kate gets Sawyer to drink some water. He says, like, they didn't teach us the whispering in the ear thing, like when we learned bedside manner. And I was like, shut your mouth, Jack. This man's about to die. But no, I mean, it's very clear that there are like also feelings between Kate and Sawyer, and like I think a Kate Sawyer relationship could have worked. Like it's very obvious that could have worked. We talked about this during the very famous scene where they're drinking by the fire together.
Yes, we did.
Which is a magnificent.
That was the last time we talked about this. Now I remember.
And yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I had the same reaction to that annoying Jack line, and what was sort of painful for me about this scene was just I felt like, oh, this is like a really nice Kate Sawyer moment.
Mm-hmm. And Jack's just here.
Yeah, why is Jack here? Like we don't need a love triangle. Like the Kate Sawyer stuff is great.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to have feelings for him because she knows he's an asshole, and also he's very alike. Like they're very alike, and that worries her. But like, they clearly are into each other, and like
much better chemistry.
Yep.
Like,
why is Jack here?
With apologies as always to the Jack and Kate fans out there. We know you're listening. We love you. We hope you'll keep listening to our podcast. But
change our mind.
Yes. Once I promise that once Juliet shows up, I at least will stop shipping Kate and Sawyer and start shipping Juliet and Sawyer instead.
I like Juliet very much.
Yeah. Should we go to the Leonard Dick?
Yeah. We played a few thoughts from Leonard earlier in the season during Adrift, the second episode of season 2, which he wrote. He was also a co-writer of Collision, so let's hear from him.
So let's talk about Collision. This is, I believe, episode 9. It starts with, Shannon has just been shot at the hands of Ana Lucia. So this is a little bit cheating because it happens in the previous episode. But why does Shannon have to die? What was the thinking about that?
There was a few factors. One is we wanted the reunion or the uniting, because it really wasn't a reunion, of the tailies with the main group to be heated, and so how do you raise those stakes? How do you make it as heated as possible, to create some conflict? But also back to what I said a moment ago about keeping the stakes on the island real is people dying. There's no stake higher than life or death. And so it worked on a few different levels, and of course it also spoke to the Sayid character and give him a level of guilt that he would never really be able to shake, and also that he'd also just had begun again to find that he was connecting with somebody. So it really worked nicely on several levels, but it really did come from the starting point was, how do we keep? How do we create real conflict, real hostility between the two groups?
So, I mean, obviously, Ana Lucia is the biggest source of that hostility, and continues to be even after this point. I think the thing that, especially going back 13 years later, the thing that struck me the most about the introduction to Ana Lucia, it's all about her with guns and firing guns at people and threatening people with guns. And, like, she's this, it's such a... I know that's not, like, the deep inner emotional thing of her character, which we can get to, but, like, she's this really trigger-happy cop. And I'm just really curious, what, if that's something that you were thinking about in terms of, like, societal implications of this character when you introduced her, or if you see this, if you see her any differently looking back when we've now had sort of this, national dialogue and awareness of police shootings and police violence.
Yeah, it was. At the time, we didn't discuss some of the larger societal issues that you pointed to. It all stemmed from character and who was this person, what motivated her, how has her life changed, why is she on the island, etc. And it actually does speak to, though, echoes a little bit what I said a few moments ago about how television has changed and the culture has changed, and so this episode is also a good example of if Lost were being created in 2018, would you still be doing that kind of story? We may very well have committed to that story because it's interesting on a character level, but it's very possible that we would have gotten some pushback from the network, who might have said it's too politically sensitive in this day and age, and so that might have led to something different. So, but at the same time, we never shied away from controversy. We wanted to embrace things that are important, but it is an interesting academic exercise to think about how would that story have been told differently in this day and age. Because back then it was 100%. This is who this character is, and what feels real about her.
Do you think you personally would want to tell this story the same way today? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I'm curious if you would approach it differently or if you would go about it the same way.
I would say I probably would, only because it's interesting. Just my personal sensibility, the fact that I'm Canadian, believe it or not, informs how I view the world, and so I may have, if not been reluctant to do it. It might have just given me pause before committing to it. But again, it was really about what is happening on a character level. We weren't trying to make a larger statement. I think that's probably what we would have encountered today. Is if we had come up with that story today, there might have been a larger discussion before committing to it. Of what is this saying? Are we making a comment? Is the audience going to think we're making a comment, even though we're not trying to make a comment? We would have. I think there would have been a longer, maybe more robust debate about how we want to approach the story. But I would say, and again, this is all speculation, I would guess that we probably would have ended up in the same place. Maybe a detail here or there would have been different, but I think on a pure character level, we would have gotten to the same place.
So on a character level, then, it's rewatching Collision, it's really striking to me how unlikable Ana Lucia is.
Yes.
I would say probably more so than anyone else you introduced on the show, even some of the villains. How did you sort of try to straddle that line between this being a character that, was unlikable and people didn't like her and she didn't like other people, but still needing, obviously, to make her someone that audiences could sympathize with?
It was, again, it stems from the character and that character story you want to tell, and that you meet a hardened young woman who's put up a wall and uses it as a defense mechanism. And what it gives you as a starting point is somewhere to go, which is, why is she like this? How does her encounter with the main group change her, and how does she evolve? So you start off with a hardened character, and also one of the things that was interesting was we were. When you're thinking about your stories, you want to have some antagonists, and so we had become familiar. Everyone had become well familiar with our original group, and so you needed somebody to be a main source of conflict with some of the new people. And Ana Lucia, we thought was somebody who could actually give us that. And also the fact that possibly that there was maybe something to do with Jack, or maybe a love interest with Sawyer along the way. So the choice was just seen as more of a starting point, and a jumping off point, and then see how the character and the relationships all evolved.
Yeah, that makes sense. And clearly you get that, because this whole episode, even this first one where the tailies and the whatever you want to call the main survivors, where they're interacting. The whole episode revolves around this drama of, is Ana Lucia going to kill Sayid or not? Which I didn't really realize until I was like 2/3 of the way through the episode, because there's so much happening and people are shooting at each other and Sawyer's dying, and it sort of finally occurred to me late in this episode, like, oh, the drama here is, what is Ana Lucia going to do, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. It was another one of these episodes where there are 22 different things happening, and then in the midst of this comes something completely unexpected. And so it's all about weaving the fabric, and then finding that one thread that completely surprises you, and it comes really shocks you as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the scene between Ana Lucia and Sayid? Or I guess it's two scenes, but it's just this really intense thing where, she basically asks him to kill her, thinking that she deserves it, and you sort of realize, and she says, "I thought I was dead. I feel dead." Sayid says something similar, and it feels to me like there's a really interesting comparison being made between these two characters and what their experiences have been, and I'm just interested what your thinking was with that and why you held them up together like that.
Yeah, I mean, from what I recall, in this one I don't remember quite as clearly, but you had these two characters who both had violence in their background, and it was a chance to explore different reactions, how each one has lived their life since their experiences with violence. And so it was just, I think that was kind of a starting point to see how each of them had the path they had followed and how it manifested in their lives. And it's interesting because Sayid is somebody that we knew very well by then. We had spent, I guess, probably close to 30 episodes, and Ana Lucia is still a relatively new character. So you have an imbalance in terms of the audience knowledge of the characters, and so the Sayid part of it becomes maybe a little more about revealing something new, whereas Ana Lucia is a blank slate, and you don't have any preconceived notions of who she is. You don't have any judgments, so you get to kill two very cool birds with one stone. And I say kill figuratively, but we're learning something new about Sayid. We're seeing a side of Sayid that surprised us, and now, and at the same time, we're being introduced to this woman and asking the question, who is she? What makes her operate? What makes her tick?
Well, I think it's definitely the first moment where she seems even a little bit sympathetic. I mean, in that scene with Sayid.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's no easy answer to this or no answer, but she's so angry, and there's this strong self-loathing. Did you talk in the writers' room at all about why Ana Lucia was this way or how she became this way? Because I don't think there's ever really a flashback that explains that.
This is one I don't recall as clearly. Okay. It was this is a character who I think starting out we had some ideas of where she was going, and so I don't remember exactly how. Some of it also was informed by performance, and Michelle had this really cool energy that we built it around. Like we would talk about the character, and then when we had Michelle, it was just a really nice balance. But I don't recall all the little nitty gritty of how we mapped her out.
That's Michelle, for our listeners, Michelle Rodriguez, by the way, who played Ana Lucia. I want to be on the record as saying I still think there was story to tell about Ana Lucia that I would have been interested in, but you guys were the writers of the show, so I can't make that decision 15 years later.
Maybe we bring her back in the Lost reboot.
Oh gosh, has anyone ever pitched that to you? Is that something that's actually come up?
I'm sure it's been discussed somewhere in the halls of ABC. My own opinion is that they should leave it alone. There are certain iconic shows that just deserve to rest in the Hall of Fame. Don't take it out of the case. But there are shows that have there are some iconic shows that have been rebooted and have been very successful. But Lost was such a unique show that I think it would be. I think it just. I don't think it would be able to be executed the way it was, and also, we forget Lost was brand new. No one had seen anything like this. The stories were told differently. If you reboot it, the audience goes in with an expectation, and they're going to think they're going to compare it to the old show, no matter what. But I'm sure somewhere in the halls of ABC, it has been discussed. How can we take a familiar title and revive it?
So that would be a perfect stopping point, except I have one more collision question that's not related to Ana Lucia,
Of
which
course.
is,
Sure.
and you sort of referenced this, that, Ana Lucia was part of the thinking was bring her in as part of the, the love triangle or quadrangle or whatever with Jack and Kate and Sawyer. And I'm so curious, the love triangle stuff, was that fun for you as a writer and something that you enjoyed doing and were into, or was that sort of like a chore that you had to do because there had to be, love drama on the show?
No, it was actually a lot of fun, particularly given the actors we had. I was on one show where it was conceived as a love triangle, and then after the pilot was filmed, the network decided that they didn't like one of the actors, and that actor was killed off, and so it went from a love triangle to a love line segment because there were only two parties. But given the actors that we had, between Josh and Matthew and Evangeline, it was it was fun to write. In some ways, it was easy to write precisely because we had these incredible actors, and it was always fun to mix and match and upset the apple cart. And it was one of the triangle was something that was carried over many seasons, and we were always looking for ways for ways to keep it fresh. And just given the actors that we had, we were just very lucky that it worked the way it did.
Yeah. Well, I guess I probably betrayed my feelings about the story with that question, but I got on board with it when they introduced Juliet, which I guess was after your time in the show.
Yeah, she was great as well. It was one of the things the show. One of the things I thought the show did when I watched it was they always mixed it up. Any new characters they introduced, there was always a really compelling story, and they seem to fit with what had already been established.
Well, I'll give you credit to your Canadian heritage that you have avoided saying anything mean or critical about anyone who was involved in the show, and I commend you for that once again.
Thank you. I don't. That's just not in my DNA.
Cool. Well, thanks, Leonard. I mean, this once again, this has been great, and I super appreciate your taking the time to do it.
So that first question you asked is something I was thinking about a lot as I watched this episode.
The gun question?
Yeah, well, and the question particularly about officer-involved shootings.
Right.
Because one of the first lines we hear in Ana Lucia's flashbacks is either her mother or the psychologist, I can't remember which, saying, "You were in an officer-involved shooting."
Yeah.
And that's a phrase now, because I am a journalist in 2018, as are you, that just sort of sets off little bells in my head.
Yep.
Because we have read so much about officer-involved shootings. They have been so scrutinized and so in the public conversation for the last 4 or 5 years that I think Leonard makes a good point that would have to be written a little differently today. I mean, again, this is a unique scenario. It's not the scenario that's typically in the news, where we have sort of a white officer shooting a black person, but yeah, I don't know. It was interesting to look back on that and say, like, I don't know if we could write the exact same thing today, just because the political climate is so charged around that.
I think that it's a good question that he had of whether the network would have stepped in and said we're not comfortable with this. I did, however, at the same time, just rewatching the episode, thought that they did it in a pretty sensitive and thoughtful way.
Yeah, it had way less to do with her being a cop and way more to do with who she is as a person. Like, yeah,
and
it wasn't a commentary on policing
at
all. Well, and all of the other police officers were doing their jobs well, right? Like, her partner, when they go out on the call together, immediately sort of turns on her and insists that she put her gun down.
Yeah, but good for him.
Yeah, and her mother, who I think is the captain, tries to take her off patrol, which...
Her mom folded so easily, by the way.
Yeah.
I was kind of like...
Yeah, probably would have been the right call. But, yeah, all the other officers are, like, very doing their jobs in a stand-up way.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
The one thing that stood out to me the most, in addition to that from Leonard this episode, was when I asked him about why Shannon had to die, and the answer entirely had to do
advance the plot.
Yes, the answer, all things that were not Shannon, which I just think speaks to our conversation about her back in Abandoned, where it's like we're trying to figure out, is there something redeeming about the end of her character? Do we ever really get a sense of who she is? Like, what's left to say, who was Shannon really? We're never going to find out. Like, yep, and even her death, like, they didn't, it was a plot thing. It wasn't about Shannon's character. Shannon's character just ends where it ends because that's what the plot demanded.
And it did advance the plot.
Yes, it did.
It gave us the last 2 wonderful episodes.
It did.
I guess that's the fun thing about talking about fiction is you don't have to stress too much about
people dying.
Yeah.
That's true. Some of the deaths are stressful. I mean, Shannon's not that much. Sorry, Shannon, but some of the later ones. So next week, what is next week?
What Kate did?
Is it already What Kate Did?
It is.
Oh my gosh.
We're finally going to find out what Kate did.
We're going to have more as well from Leonard Dick next week. Some broader thoughts about Season 2 and how the writers constructed this wonderful season of the show, so stay tuned for that.
As always, you can come find us, chat with us on Facebook at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast, Twitter @thehatchpodcast. You can also call us and leave us a voicemail if you ever feel like it at 9546-DHARMA.
If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube or if you found the link on Twitter, please also subscribe on your podcast app so that you're getting us in your podcast feed every single week because we come out with a new episode every week.
Yeah, it's a huge help if you like the show. If you can rate and review us, that helps other people find us. Other notes, our cover art is by Danny Roth. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen.
We'll see you next week.
Namaste.